The year was 1989. The Cold War was cracking, empires were trembling, and somewhere between Berlin and Kabul, history was being rewritten in silence. For 4 decades, the world had lived on the edge of nuclear fear. But now, something else was happening, not in the shadows of missiles, but in the hearts of nations that no longer trusted their own power. The Soviet Union, once unshakable, was collapsing from within. Factories silent, bread lines stretching for miles, soldiers unpaid and forgotten. And in the faraway mountains of Afghanistan, its Red Army was limping home defeated, exhausted, and haunted by a war it never truly understood. To the world, it was the end of an era. To those who watched closely, it was the beginning of something darker. Because the fall of one empire never ends with silence, it always leaves a vacuum. And in that vacuum, others rise. In Washington, victory tasted sweet. The United States had outlasted its greatest rival without a single direct battle. But in the smoke of celebration, the seeds of new conflict were already growing. The CIA, once the sharpest blade of American power, was shifting its focus from communists to chaos, from red flags to black markets. And in the deserts of the Middle East, unseen forces began to take shape. Iraq had just ended its brutal 8-year war with Iran, a war that drained millions of lives and reshaped the balance of the region. Saddam Hussein stood tall, believing himself the guardian of Arab strength. But his pride had no limit, and his debts had no mercy. Kuwait, small yet rich, became his obsession. Oil, the black blood of the modern world, was his justification. In August 1990, his tanks rolled across the border, and in one night, the Gulf was on fire. The world watched in disbelief. The same man who once fought Iran with Western support was now the enemy. But this time, America moved fast. Under the name Operation Desert Storm, the largest coalition since World War II was formed. Over 30 nations joined forces to push Iraq back, a display of modern warfare the world had never seen before. Stealth bombers sliced the sky, smart missiles struck with surgical precision, and for the first time, war was televised in real time. To the people watching at home, it looked like a video game. To those on the ground, it was hell painted with technology. But behind every war, there are deeper motives: oil contracts, regional control, and the age-old battle for dominance. When Saddam's army finally fell, and the burning oil fields turned the daylight into night, the West declared victory. Yet in the ruins of Baghdad, something new was born, a hatred that would take decades to fully ignite. In the shadows, extremist ideologies began whispering again. Veterans of Afghanistan, men forged in holy war, saw the new conflict as proof that the West had no limits. To them, it wasn't about Kuwait or Iraq, it was about humiliation, pride, and revenge. Among those whispers was a familiar voice, calm, patient, and dangerous. A man who had once been a U.S. ally in the Afghan war. His name was Osama bin Laden. He watched as foreign troops set foot in the land of Mecca and Medina, a sin he could never forgive. To him, the presence of Western soldiers on sacred soil was an invasion of faith itself. From that moment, his war was no longer local, it was global. While the world celebrated peace after the Gulf War, bin Laden quietly built networks across Sudan, Yemen, and Afghanistan. Financing operations, training followers, spreading ideology, a movement born in shadows, waiting for its chance to strike. Meanwhile, inside the Soviet ruins, Russia itself was falling apart. Old generals sold weapons for food. Nuclear scientists fled abroad. And in the chaos, black markets for arms and intelligence exploded. Chechnya rose in rebellion, Yugoslavia burned in civil war, and across Eastern Europe, nationalism returned like a forgotten ghost. The 1990s became a decade of illusion. The world looked peaceful on the surface, but underground, it was reshaping. Technology was growing faster than morality. Economies were rising faster than justice. And ideologies old and new were mutating into monsters no one could control. In America, victory brought arrogance. In the Middle East, defeat brought rage. And in the ruins of both, the 21st century was waiting to be born in fire. A soldier once said, "We thought we ended the Cold War, but maybe we just changed its battlefield." The 1990s began with promises: peace, progress, prosperity. The Cold War was over, and for the first time in half a century, the world believed it could finally breathe. In Washington, politicians spoke of a new world order. The Iron Curtain had fallen, democracy was spreading, and technology promised to connect humanity like never before. But beneath the optimism, the ground was shifting again quietly, invisibly. When the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991, 15 new nations were born overnight. The red flag came down from the Kremlin, but with it fell an empire's stability. Nuclear warheads sat unguarded, scientists went unpaid, and criminal networks moved faster than governments could react. The global stage had changed, but the actors hadn't. In the Middle East, the scars of the Gulf War were still open. Iraq was crippled by sanctions. Its people starved while Saddam tightened his grip through fear and propaganda. Every empty plate and broken city block became fuel for resentment, not just toward their dictator, but toward the powers that had promised liberation. Meanwhile, across the border in Saudi Arabia, the presence of American troops once hailed as protectors became a symbol of humiliation. In the mosques, whispers turned into sermons. In the mountains, sermons turned into vows. And in the shadows, networks of anger found direction. Osama bin Laden, the man once seen as a hero of the anti-Soviet jihad, had become an outcast, a radical, and a visionary for a new kind of war. He wasn't building an army to conquer land, he was building a movement to destroy systems. His idea was simple but devastating: use faith as a weapon, and fear as an army. No uniforms. No borders. No mercy. While he plotted in caves, the rest of the world was lost in celebration. The 1990s were an age of illusions: glittering screens, booming markets, and the illusion that history had finally ended. The internet arrived, connecting billions in seconds, but also opening doors for propaganda and recruitment that no one understood yet. The West believed technology would unite humanity. But for those living in war-torn lands, it became a weapon, a tool to spread hate, inspire revenge, and coordinate chaos. In Africa, the scars of colonialism reopened in blood. Rwanda descended into genocide, nearly 1 million dead in 100 days. In the Balkans, Yugoslavia burned as ethnic wars turned neighbors into executioners. The United Nations watched, powerless. The superpowers that once divided the world now stood aside, unsure how to stop the madness they had helped create decades earlier. And in that silence, extremism flourished. By 1996, bin Laden had returned to Afghanistan, a land still haunted by ghosts of Soviet tanks and CIA dollars. The Taliban, young students turned warriors, had taken control of Kabul, promising order through divine law. They welcomed bin Laden as an ally, not a guest. Together, they began crafting something the world hadn't seen before: a global network of terror, financed by fear and hidden by faith. Their training camps filled with recruits, men who had never known peace, only war. They came from Yemen, Egypt, Algeria, even from the streets of Europe and America. Each carried the same belief, that they were chosen to wage the final battle against the West. The U.S., distracted by prosperity and politics, underestimated the storm. Intelligence reports warned of a new threat: coordinated, patient, and invisible. But bureaucracy drowned the warnings in paper. The same arrogance that celebrated victory in the Cold War now blinded them to a new kind of enemy. In 1998, the first major strike came. 2 U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania exploded within minutes of each other. Hundreds were killed. Thousands injured. The message was clear: the war had already begun. America responded with cruise missiles, striking camps in Afghanistan and Sudan. But it was like punching smoke: the targets vanished before impact. Bin Laden survived, and in surviving, became a legend. To his followers, it was proof that God protected him. To the U.S., it was proof that something far greater was coming. By the turn of the millennium, the pattern was unmistakable. Small attacks, failed plots, mysterious warnings, each one a test, a rehearsal. And yet, the world still slept. Then came the USS Cole, October 2000. A small boat packed with explosives rammed into a U.S. destroyer in Yemen. 17 sailors died. Once again, Al-Qaeda was behind it. Once again, the world moved on. But in the deserts of Afghanistan, plans were already written, pilots were already training, and history was counting down to a morning that would change everything. In the summer of 2001, a few men boarded planes in America unnoticed, unfeared, and unimagined. Their war wasn't fought with armies, but with tickets, patience, and faith twisted into madness. They were about to pull the trigger that decades of politics, proxy wars, and arrogance had loaded. And on a clear September morning, the world would finally wake up. It was a morning like any other. September 11, 2001. Blue skies over New York, ordinary people heading to work, unaware that history was about to split in two. At 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 tore through the North Tower of the World Trade Center. At first, people thought it was an accident, a terrible, tragic mistake. But 17 minutes later, the second plane hit the South Tower. In that instant, the illusion shattered. The world realized it wasn't an accident. It was war. Phones rang endlessly. Streets filled with ash, fear, and disbelief. The towers burned like torches over the skyline of Manhattan, symbols of modern civilization melting before the eyes of millions. At 9:37 a.m., another plane slammed into the Pentagon. At 10:03, Flight 93 went down in a Pennsylvania field after passengers fought back, saving countless others at the cost of their own lives. By 10:28, both towers had collapsed. A city built on ambition now lay buried under smoke and sorrow. Nearly 3,000 people were gone, fathers, mothers, firefighters, strangers. The mightiest nation on earth had been attacked not by armies or missiles but by 19 men with box cutters and belief. The U.S. was in shock, but the silence didn't last long. By nightfall, the hunt had begun. President George W. Bush stood before the nation and promised justice or vengeance. Either you are with us, he declared, or you are with the terrorists. The age of uncertainty was over. The age of retaliation had begun. Within weeks, American bombers filled the skies over Afghanistan. Operation Enduring Freedom had one goal: destroy Al-Qaeda and the Taliban who sheltered them. Kabul fell in a month. Taliban fighters vanished into the mountains. Bin Laden disappeared into the caves of Tora Bora, as U.S. forces closed in. For a moment, victory seemed certain. But victory in Afghanistan was a mirage. The terrain was unforgiving: mountains that swallowed armies, deserts that hid ghosts. Every village had secrets, every silence could be a trap. The Taliban melted away, only to return stronger, deadlier, and more invisible than before. And for every bomb that fell, another young man somewhere picked up a rifle in rage. America believed it was liberating Afghanistan. But to many Afghans, it was another occupation, another foreign power writing its will on their soil. In the chaos, warlords returned to power, corruption spread, and the hope of freedom was buried beneath money and mistrust. Billions were spent. Thousands died. And the man who started it all, Osama bin Laden, remained free. Then, in 2003, the focus shifted. The U.S. government turned its gaze toward Iraq. The reasons were unclear, the intelligence questionable, but the decision was made. Weapons of mass destruction, that was the justification. Shock and awe, that was the strategy. When the bombs began to fall on Baghdad, the world watched live. The sky lit up with fire. The capital of an ancient civilization trembled under thunder that wasn't natural. In 3 weeks, Saddam Hussein's regime collapsed. A statue fell, cameras flashed, and for a moment, it looked like another victory. But just like in Afghanistan, the victory was hollow. No weapons of mass destruction were ever found. And the power vacuum left behind unleashed a storm worse than anyone imagined. The U.S. disbanded the Iraqi army. Hundreds of thousands of trained soldiers left jobless and furious. They didn't vanish. They reorganized. Former officers, extremists, and insurgents found common cause in their hatred of occupation. Soon, Iraq became a breeding ground for chaos. Suicide bombings, sectarian killings, roadside IEDs. Every street became a battlefield. In the middle of it all, a name began to surface: Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. A man more ruthless than bin Laden, more violent than the Taliban. He founded a group that would later shake the world again: Al-Qaeda in Iraq, the seed that would one day grow into the Islamic State. The war on terror had become an endless loop. One enemy fell, 2 more rose. Each airstrike created a martyr. Each raid planted the seed of revenge. And as soldiers died overseas, trust eroded at home. The American people were promised safety, but instead got fear: airport lines, surveillance, and the feeling that no one was truly free anymore. The world had changed not just in politics, but in psychology. Borders felt smaller, but danger felt everywhere. In the caves of Pakistan, bin Laden watched it all unfold, his plan working beyond imagination. His goal wasn't to defeat America in battle, but to make it destroy itself slowly through endless wars and paranoia. And for nearly a decade, that plan worked. Meanwhile, in the shadows of conflict, technology advanced faster than morality. Drones took to the skies, killing enemies from thousands of miles away. But for every successful strike, innocent lives were lost: children, families, entire villages erased by collateral damage. It wasn't televised. It wasn't counted. But it was remembered. By 2009, a new face entered the White House: Barack Obama. He promised to end the wars, to bring troops home, to heal the wounds of the post-9/11 world. But war doesn't end easily when the enemy hides among the innocent. The fight against terror had become a global shadow war, from the deserts of Yemen to the jungles of the Philippines. And yet, in one daring night in May 2011, the world witnessed a moment that felt like closure. American Navy SEALs stormed a compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan. Shots were fired, radios crackled, and a voice confirmed the words the world had waited a decade to hear. Geronimo Ekia. Enemy killed in action. Osama bin Laden was dead. The world cheered. Streets filled with celebration. But deep down, the question lingered: was it really over? Because while one man was gone, his idea, his war, had already outlived him. And somewhere in the ashes of Iraq, that idea was taking a new shape, darker and far more dangerous than before. The night bin Laden was killed, the world believed the war on terror was over. But wars don't end with a single death, they evolve. They shift, adapt, and rise again under new names and new flags. In the ruins of Iraq, something was already brewing. The prisons that once held Saddam's loyalists had become breeding grounds for something far more dangerous. Men who had lost everything, soldiers, fanatics, and opportunists, found unity in vengeance. Among them was a man named Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. A quiet, calculating strategist who would turn chaos into empire. By 2014, the world would come to know his creation, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, ISIS. Its black flags rose over cities like Mosul, Raqqa, and Fallujah. Convoys of militants stormed across deserts, capturing territory the size of entire countries. They filmed every victory, every execution, every symbol of fear, turning terror into a broadcast. And through the internet, they reached millions, recruiting not just soldiers, but believers. The West had never seen an enemy like this. ISIS didn't want negotiation. It wanted apocalypse. And its strength wasn't just in weapons, but in ideology, a twisted narrative that promised power to the powerless and purpose to the lost. As bombs fell once again over Iraq and Syria, old players returned to the field. The United States led the coalition. Russia joined the fight not for peace, but for influence. Iran, Turkey, and countless militias all claimed their side of the chaos. The Middle East became a chessboard of foreign interests, with civilians paying the highest price. Cities that once stood for centuries were reduced to ashes. Aleppo, Mosul, Raqqa, names that once meant culture now meant catastrophe. Millions fled their homes, creating one of the largest refugee crises in modern history. Borders collapsed, and the world looked on uncertain, divided, and exhausted. But even as ISIS's territory crumbled, the spirit of the war spread. Lone wolves began attacking cities far from the battlefield: Paris, London, Brussels, Orlando. The battlefield was no longer defined by maps, but by minds. Everywhere became a potential target. Meanwhile, new powers began to rise from the shadows of the old world. Russia, under Vladimir Putin, reclaimed its lost confidence. The invasion of Crimea in 2014 was the first signal the Cold War had returned, but colder than before. Cyber attacks replaced spies. Disinformation replaced bombs. The war wasn't fought on fields anymore, it was fought online, in elections, in algorithms, in the unseen world of data. China, too, stepped onto the global stage. Not through war, but through economy, ports, trade, technology, and influence. The Belt and Road Initiative stretched across continents, tying nations together under silent control. No missiles, no invasions, just quiet dominance through dependency. The U.S., once unchallenged, found itself stretched thin. Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Africa, endless fronts with no clear victory. The cost of global policing had become unbearable. And at home, division grew deeper. Politics turned into war zones of their own, truth became optional, anger became currency. The superpower that had once united the world against terror was now tearing itself apart from within. In August 2021, the last American soldier left Afghanistan. 2 decades, $2 trillion, thousands of lives, and the Taliban were back in power, exactly where it all began. The images were haunting: helicopters lifting from rooftops, desperate crowds at the airport, the flag of the Taliban rising over Kabul once again. It felt like history repeating itself, not as tragedy, but as exhaustion. And yet, beneath all of it, beneath the ruins, the politics, the endless headlines, the same truth echoed. War never really ends. It just changes its shape. Today, conflict wears new faces. Drones fly where soldiers once marched. Artificial intelligence predicts strikes before they happen. Satellites watch every inch of the earth, and wars are now fought not for land, but for information. In the halls of power, leaders talk of deterrence, of balance, of peace, but the silence between nations feels heavier than gunfire. A single spark could ignite the next global storm, whether in Ukraine, Taiwan, or the South China Sea. And the question that haunts every general, every strategist, every survivor remains the same. Did humanity learn anything from the wars before? Because from 1967 to today, from Vietnam to Afghanistan, from Baghdad to Kyiv, one pattern has never changed. Power rises, power falls, and in between, innocent people pay the price. The camera zooms out, satellite view cities glowing like veins in the darkness of the planet. You can't tell who's winning, because no one really is. Empires come and go, but the battlefield remains. Only the names change and the flags. And somewhere, a child born under the thunder of drones looks up at the sky, not with fear but with the question every generation asks. When will it end? Because in the end, it's not about who won the war. It's about who survived it.